Sometimes a man reaches the bottom so quietly that the world barely notices the sound. Martin Kell did not collapse in a single moment. He thinned out over years, worn down by loss, debt, and the kind of grief that settles into the bones. He had buried his wife Sarah under a pale California sky and returned to a life that no longer fit him. The small mechanic shop in Bakersfield, once alive with noise and purpose, now echoed with unpaid bills and unfinished conversations. His hands were still scarred with grease and years of honest labor, but the certainty that work could fix anything had vanished with her last breath. When he stood at the county auction and raised his hand on a 40-acre strip of desert no one wanted, it wasn't hope that moved him. It was hunger, hunger for something that could not be taken by banks, courts, or memory. $25 bought him land with no water, no road, no future, at least on paper. People laughed when they heard. Martin did not explain. How could he say that he needed a corner of the world that answered only to his name? That he needed proof, however small, that he still existed beyond overdue notices and sympathetic looks. As he folded the deed and tucked it into his jacket, he felt a strange calm, as if some quiet part of him had already started walking toward a destination he did not yet understand. The desert received him without ceremony. The drive east stripped away neighborhoods and noise until only wind, scrub, and sky remained. Martin followed the parcel map across a dirt track that rattled his truck and his nerves, expecting emptiness. Instead, a farmhouse rose from the sand like a memory refusing to stay buried. Weathered wood, sagging porch, windows dark with age, it should not have been there. County records said the land was unimproved. Satellite images showed nothing. Yet the house stood solid and patient, as if it had been waiting. And in front of it stood a barefoot woman with sunburned skin and pale, watchful eyes. She did not greet him or threaten him. She simply looked at him the way someone looks at a long-late appointment. When Martin stammered that he had just bought the land, that he did not know anyone lived there, she nodded as though this confirmed something she already knew. "I've been watching the line," she said, her voice nearly lost to the wind. The words meant nothing, but the certainty behind them unsettled him. Before he could ask more, she spoke his name, spoke of Sarah, of his daughter Emma, of the choice he had made with his last $25. The desert felt suddenly too quiet. Martin backed away, heart racing, telling himself this was coincidence, desperation, imagination. But as he drove back toward town, the image of the farmhouse and the woman, Call, followed him, lodged in his thoughts like a splinter he could not remove. Sleep abandoned him that night, replaced by questions that circled endlessly. Martin returned days later with water and food, driven less by reason than by a pull he could not name. Call allowed him inside the farmhouse without comment. The interior was sparse but cared for, as though time itself had slowed within those walls. Dust lay lightly, disturbed by recent sweeping. In a cracked frame hung a photograph of a family from another era standing in front of the same house. One child in the picture looked exactly like Call. When Martin asked, she did not deny it, but she did not explain it either. She led him behind the house to a stone half buried in sand, carved with symbols that seemed to shift when he stared too long. Standing near it made the air feel heavy, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. "This is the boundary," Call said. She spoke of a line between worlds, of watchers who stood guard so that what waited beyond could not cross. Martin laughed, then stopped laughing when dusk fell and shapes gathered at the edge of his vision, figures almost human, pressing against something invisible. Fear crawled up his spine, not because he believed her, but because part of him already did. The desert had not given him land. It had given him responsibility, and it was watching to see what he would do with it. Evidence followed him home, refusing to remain a story told in fading light. In an old trunk inside the farmhouse, Martin found journals written by a county surveyor from the 1950s, documenting the same stone, the same disturbances, the same terrible necessity of watching. The man had vanished from public record, leaving behind only his handwriting and a duty passed on in silence. Later, Martin would discover his own father's name tied to those coordinates, his disappearance dismissed decades earlier as voluntary. The truth cut deeper. His father had stood at that boundary and hesitated. In the darkness beyond the stone, Martin saw him, trapped, aware, unable to return. The desert had not swallowed him, fear had. When Emma confronted Martin about his strange behavior and unpaid obligations, he nearly broke. He wanted to tell her everything, to make her see what he saw, but when he brought her to the property, she saw only empty land. Only those called could see the house. Only those called could see Call. Emma saw a grieving father pointing at nothing, and the distance between them widened into terror. Martin stood between two realities, both demanding something he did not know how to give. The choice did not resolve itself, it sharpened. Call explained the ritual of binding, the pain, the permanence. She explained that the line had not chosen Martin but Emma. The truth struck harder than any vision beyond the boundary. His daughter, barely 17, steady and brave in ways that mirrored her mother, had been marked by the same pull that had drawn him. Martin raged against it, offered himself in her place, begged for an alternative. There was none. The line did not negotiate. Emma listened, read the journals, and made her decision with the same quiet certainty Sarah once carried. Martin watched her prepare, knowing that love could not shield her from purpose. The desert night wrapped around them as coyotes cried in the distance, and the wind combed through Joshua trees. When the ritual was done, the symbols burned into Emma's chest like pale silver scars. The boundary answered her, and Call was released. Martin felt pride and horror entwined so tightly he could not separate them. His daughter had stepped into a role that would take pieces of her over time, and all he could do was witness and support, leaving before dusk so he would not have to watch her hold back the darkness. Months passed, measured not by calendars but by visits and supplies. Emma grew stronger and older in her eyes, learning patterns and warnings written by generations who had guarded the same invisible line. The farmhouse changed under her care, becoming orderly, livable, almost warm. Call wrote letters from a distant town, learning how to be ordinary again, haunted by phantom sensations of a duty she no longer carried. Martin returned to Bakersfield each time with a quieter heart and a heavier understanding. He reopened the shop, paid what he could, and learned to live with unanswered questions. Grief did not leave him, but it changed shape. It no longer hollowed him out. It reminded him what had been given and what had been chosen. Sitting on the porch with Emma, drinking coffee while the desert shifted colors, he saw that sacrifice was not always loud or celebrated. Sometimes it was simply done, day after day, by those willing to stand where others could not. The world beyond the boundary remained unaware of how close it came to disaster each dawn and dusk, and perhaps that was the point. Protection worked best when it went unnoticed. Martin learned to measure his life differently. Success was no longer counted in profit or praise, but in moments of connection that survived despite distance and fear. Emma still smiled. She still laughed at his terrible jokes. She still asked him to bring fresh fruit and books. These were small mercies, but they were real. Watching her, Martin understood that purpose did not erase love, it tested it. He could not walk the boundary for her, but he could remain present, steady, and honest. He could tell her that her mother would have been proud, that bravery often looked like quiet endurance. The desert no longer frightened him. It had shown him the truth of inheritance, not land or money, but responsibility passed through blood and choice. His father's fate remained a warning etched into memory, a reminder that hesitation carried its own cost. Martin had once believed his life was defined by what he had lost. Standing there, he realized it was defined by what he had been trusted to protect, even indirectly. The line had taken much from his family, but it had also given them a reason to stand. In the end, Martin understood that meaning rarely arrives wrapped in comfort. It comes disguised as burden, as duty, as a road no one else can see. He had bought 40 acres of desert